Yeah, I'm Tom Trusser, and a little bit about my background. I used to be an actor. That's me when I had hair. In 1987, in a strange adaptation of Hamlet taking place in Hollywood in the 1940s called Dashiell Hamlet, believe it or not. Then I was a theater producer at a place called Pegasus Players. I was probably the most successful non-equity producer in our history, in that we won 20 Jeff citations, and twice I had 3 shows playing at the same time. And I created the Chicago Young Playwrights Festival in 1986, which is still going strong 35 years later. I then worked for this place called People's Housing, which is where I'm going to be talking to you in a minute, as a community developer. But I also have worked in the for-profit field as I guess you could say, education and leadership experience designer for Fortune 200 companies. I actually tasted a world of the internet, a startup back in 1999, and this company, OurHouse.com, was the online play for Ace Hardware, and we blew through $160 million in 2 years, and all I have to show for it is this T-shirt. But I'm also a longtime educator, and I've taught for 20 years at 6 local universities, classes like The Artist as Activist, Creative Tools for Social Change, Leadership, Community Organizing 101, Creativity and Public Policy. I believe I'm the first person maybe in the United States who's ever designed and taught a class for creativity as public policy. Taught that in a number of local universities. My public work goes back, this latest portfolio, I would say, is about 13, 14 years old, starting with the fight to stop the privatization of Lincoln Park in 2008. We sued the Park District and the Latin School. That story is on the website, wesavelincolnpark.org. That led me to lead the campaign to stop the Olympics from coming to Chicago. Unbelievable, yes, with no money and no office, we defeated the most powerful people in the world and Oprah.
Yeah, I was going to say, and Oprah.
And Oprah, yes, sir, and Scottie Pippen, the both of them. And this was called No Game Chicago. The website is still alive to look at it. And surprise, surprise, that story has never been told in the Chicago media, never. There's been a complete blackout on that work from that day to this. But we did it, and it's a story that I'm proud of, in that we know that we were the difference in why Chicago was booted from the Olympics in the first round of voting in Copenhagen, Denmark, on October 2nd, 2009. We were there. That led me to run for office. I don't know if that was crazy or headstrong or whatever, but I was the Green Party candidate for Cook County Board President and ran against Toni Preckwinkle. I called her the new face of the Democratic machine, and how right I was, because she then became the chairman of the Democratic Party. I got 54,000 votes with hardly a budget. She got 940,000. And where she is to this day as our Cook County Board President. I turned a lot of that learning into opening the Civic Lab, and we opened it in the first floor of an old firehouse, which you see in that picture, in June of 2013. We were America's first co-working space dedicated to social justice and civic engagement. And over the course of the time, we did many, many wonderful things there. In 2016, I published this book called Chicago is Not Broke, Funding the City We Deserve, which we talked about this very morning on WBEZ's Reset program. Some of the things that happened at the Civic Lab over the course of the 2 years there, a couple thousand people use the website, use that space. 16 groups work there every day. You can see some of them there on the lower right. We built tools. We had a terrestrial radio station housed in the Civic Lab, a broadcast quality media studio with green screen capabilities, a kitchen, a machine shop, and so much more. Unfortunately, we couldn't get anybody to fund it. Maybe we were ahead of our time. Now everybody's calling themselves a lab. Lab is maybe shorthand for being nimble and being inventive and being creative, but we were the Civic Lab, And we still are around, obviously, but we're in virtual space. We do our work continuous. We'd love to get a physical space back, and maybe that's one of the things we can talk about as we go forward. One of the things we created was the TIF Illumination Project. We looked at TIFs, tax increment financing, using data mining, graphic design, the arts, old school investigatory reporting, and organizing. That has led to over 170 public forums from 2013 to like yesterday. And once again, the Chicago media has completely ignored that work, except for the Chicago Tribune just 2 weeks ago. I came on board and wrote an article, but we have not been able to get the major media to cover any of those 170 public meetings, believe it or not. 12,000 people have come out to these meetings, and we don't have a dime to spend on marketing. So we must be doing something that's tickling Chicago civic faculties. We've been now part of organizing with citizen groups across the country who are fighting injustice and economic segregation and racist public policies that essentially strip mine communities of color under different names. And we call out TIFs as being one of those. As a result of all these meetings, we kept getting asked, like, what can we do? What can we do? That we're angry, we don't like things. So we created the Power Institute, people organizing to win, engage, and resist in 2017, myself and my colleague, Jonathan Peck, an African-American seasoned and senior organizer. And we've done about 50 open enrollment workshops, Chicago 101, Community Organizing 101, Grassroots Campaigning 101, Chicago Budget 101, and many more, to about 2,000 people. We work extensively with DePaul and Loyola, and we also have an ongoing engagement with Adler University. As far as my own chops go, well, I was a member of Leadership Greater Chicago from 1990. I think I was the first person from the arts ever to be accepted into that program. I think in the 20 some odd years since there have been at least 2, maybe 3 others, leaders from the arts. But I was singular in my insistence that the Leadership Greater Chicago add arts and culture to its description of what makes Chicago great. And I was unsuccessful. I mean, decades of trying to get them to think that when they discuss about the regional economy or the regional transportation or the justice system, that in the same breath, they must talk about our cultural and creative heritage and our cultural and creative economies. It's been a struggle. Those guys are retrograde. I was selected as one of the best of New Cities 2015 cadre for my work in defending the public's interest. I was an Encore Fellow. And because of what we did for No Game Chicago, the Audubon Society gave us the 2011 Protector of the Environment for a single act. That was for our work in stopping the Olympics from coming to Chicago. Thank you, Audubon Society. But you guys are really here to hear about my experience at a place called People's Housing. And so before we get into the slides, I'm going to click on this. And this is a brief news clip of about under 2 minutes from about 1995. And you'll see the young Bill Curtis.
Our sign of hope this evening is about saving the best of what is old and building on what is new. It's about...
Let me know if you can see and hear that.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
About trying to make a difference, trying to remake their own community. And they're doing it on a number of fronts, as Burley Hines reports.
This building in Rogers Park is a dedication to an idea. It gives some people here a chance for affordable housing that they ordinarily would not have. This is a picture of what the building looked like before a group called People's Housing took it over.
We have been involved in community development for 15 years, and what I do with the Community Arts Program is add the arts to the agenda for community development. We believe that the arts saves lives.
Tom Tressa came to Chicago 16 years ago to be an actor. Today his work is out of the old Howard Theater. He directs now rather than acts, and his work extends beyond just providing housing in a depressed community.
Your direction should go not sideways, but up and down.
This is a tile-making class.
Tile prep people, that's just one project that we run that combines the arts with economic development.
The class is a good way also of giving active children something to do.
The tile people is our business where we set up our tiles, we paint them, and they're for sale to sell. You know, if you buy one, and then you can put it with other tiles.
Tressa says every day here is an adventure, such as raising money for programs, but the object is to develop community solidarity in a safe place. Burley Hines, Channel 2 News.
Tresser manages to keep his hand in acting by hosting an open mic amateur show at the theater. That'd be good.
That's our
All right. Okay, so that's a nice intro to, it gives you a sense of what we were doing there. The People's Housing was a nonprofit organization founded in 1979, and it did economic development and community building. They were located in East Rogers Park, sort of in the upper notch of the city, you know, where there's on the border of Evanston. Their mission was to create in East Rogers Park a hospitable community where every person's full potential is realized and basic human needs are met. In 1993, I went to work for them as the Director of Cultural Development, a completely novel position inside the economic development world. They had recently purchased the Howard Theater building, which was built in 1917. And you can see this old illustration of the full structure. The apartments for 2 floors flanking the main shell of the theater, and storefront businesses along the street. My task was to use the arts to advance the work of the organization to quote unquote develop the people of that community and to bring the old theater back to life. We had no blueprint and no money other than my own salary. This is where the theater was. You can see this notch called North of Howard had been characterized as a jungle. You know, that's how people called it, the Jonquil Jungle, by the local people because of the number of people of color who lived there in low-income housing. So that was the area that we managed some of our properties. The North of Howard communities is what we called it. The characteristics of the people who lived around there back from 1990, as you can see, a little under 50% African American, about another 27% Latino, and 23, 24% white. The median household income was, as you see, about $19,000. So the primary services of People's Housing was, develop, rehab, and manage those properties, and then to do community organizing to improve community safety and clean up the park. And after I got there, a third component to their major work was the arts, combining arts and creativity with the concept of economic and cultural development became synonymous. So here you can see a little bit of what People's Housing was about, getting an old building through a tax court or outright purchase, and then going a complete gut job. By the time I got there, they had 21 properties with 600 families, low and very low income people living in those properties. They had brought in about $22 million of capital into those projects. Now, here's the Howard Theater, located, as I say, on Howard Street. It's the Howard Street L is right behind there. So it's a very prominent position in the community. Thousands of people walk by it every day. And I dare say that at that time, they forgot that it was a theater because there was no marquee or anything. People walk by it every day. So you can see a sense of the environment, what it used to look like, the architecture features. Here's an old, advertisement from the 20s. It had closed in 1977, and the last movie that was playing there was Deliverance. So it's a little creepy. So there's you can see sort of the blueprint, the floor plan. The main space of the theater was closed off because of water damage. So this was an unsafe area. And so what we had here is essentially this sort of lobby area, for lack of a better term. The lobby area was actually 4,000 square feet. And what I had done was install right around here a heater. So we installed a heater and was able to heat this lobby, which would have been very chilly, and turned it into a usable space. We built a stage right here. You can see where the cursor is moving up against the windows. So when people were on the stage, they had their back to the street facing this area. And we put a microphone here with a loudspeaker on the street. So anything happening on the stage was immediately broadcast, and it became a really cheap way to advertise our work. So we took a grassroots, creative, and fun approach to build awareness, attracting talent, and getting stuff. And that would be my first lesson to you for the work that you're approaching. And I could tell you more about that if we were to work together. But for an example, there's nothing in that space. So what are we going to do for seats? So here was our solution. We did Spare a Chair Day. We advertised locally. We put flyers out in our own buildings, and we had volunteers set up to receive. We were making hot dogs and giving them away. It was a kind of a little celebration with some canned music. And on that Saturday, people showed up and gave us over 100 chairs. It was all kinds of styles, and and we put the name of each donor on the chair. So it was like the opera, you can have your name on the arm of the chair. We had a crew cleaning up the chairs and getting them ready and deployed right away. So that's, but then later I got chairs donated from a women's college. So that's why they're all the same. They were going to throw out those chairs. This is about a year later. Upstairs, above the space, the lobby space, was a large, I think it was a ballroom. And I think in the olden times, I think they had many events for the community up there. And we used that for all kinds of classes and rentals and community dances. It was a very lively space right above where we were. But we also had the first floor of our HQ building, which was unfinished. So you can see we turned it into an art studio. It was sort of unfinished. We put an industrial strength kiln in there and drying racks, and it was a place to get dirty and paint and make mess. And it was also heavily used. But I also used the street. This is right in front of the Howard Theater. So anytime we had events, I invited the staff to set their table up. So this is, you see one of the developers here. This one right here is a staff member whose job it is to populate our projects, with tenants. So it became a powerful marketing tool for the entire organization. And it cast a very favorable light on the entire People's Housing operation. People started to love our work, and they transferred that love to our other properties. And it turned out that anytime I did an event, I was a very popular man in the organization. Everybody wanted to come and table because they knew they could engage the residents in a really wonderful way. But there's also a vacant lot across the street from us that we took over that and put a farmer's market, working with the city, the first farmer's market in that community ever. Also, we did a grassroots marketing campaign. I sat in front of the theater for hours. You can see this model here. Architect that we were working with made a very nice model. You can see this is what it looks like. And I just sat around with this sort of display and basically said, you can see the sign here, ask me about the Howard Theater. So, as I say, thousands of people are walking by that place, forgetting that they didn't realize that was actually, this facility. And I had so many fun conversations with people. I remember one guy telling me, oh, he met his wife there when they were teenagers. He had his first kiss in the balcony or whatever. Some guy, he stopped and said, his first job was as an usher in the Howard Theater. So all this kind of nostalgia and curiosity. And of course, the ever-present clipboard, to grab your contact information. So we'll let you know when we're up and running here. Also, looking for people who would use the space. Hey, do you want to teach something, or maybe you're a performer? How about that? And that led to all kinds of things. As you can see, we started programming the space. So from April 93 to December 95, when People's Housing readily closed, I grew the program to a staff of 7, a budget of $250,000, serving approximately 12,000 residents a year. And we had stories in the local papers, radio, TV, and magazines, as you saw that little news clip. I'm kind of an expert at working the media when they'll pay attention. All right, let's just show you a few examples of some of the many programs that I don't want to bore you to tears, but here's just a sampling of what we were able to accomplish in a relatively short period of time. The first thing that was sort of took off was our all ages open mic. And that started with one performance in January of 1994. It was like 50 degrees below zero. I'm not kidding. It was absolutely frigid. But we packed the theater. We didn't realize what we were getting into. And when the gentleman who was the programmer, an artist named Oba William Brown, who's an old friend of mine, Oba William King, excuse me, he was the curator. When he approached me in the fall of 1993 to set up the open mic, we had no equipment. We didn't have a mic. We didn't have a mic stand. But I committed to doing the event in early, as I say, mid-January, and I had about 2 months to organize. And by the time we did the event, I had everything donated. I had the microphones, I had speakers, I had everything that I was able to get from different sources. And at one point, a local DJ just pulled up in a truck and dumped a bunch of speakers and mixers. He says, "I hear you guys are doing arts program. Here's some stuff for you." So it was really quite magic. But by the time the open mic opened, we had the gear, and we had two shorties who were going to be our tech guys. They were 14 years old, and they fell in love with this idea of the technology. And they would set up everything. They'd lay the wires and mix things down. And I told them that there's more jobs behind the microphone than there are on the mic, and they understood that. And they got to be so good that when we would do these open mics on a weekly basis, people would just come and hand them their mixtapes, and the kids would know exactly what to do and get it ready and prepare. But you can see over the time, we had quite a bevy of performers. The woman in the center, the young woman, that's C. She came to us and was doing rap, mimicking rappers that were already extant. And we told her, why don't you create your own poetry? And she came back with an original piece the next week, and she took off. You see the woman holding the mic in the upper corner. That's Mrs. Jones. She showed up one day and just took the mic and started belting out "God Bless the Child," unaccompanied. And everybody was completely stunned. And she said, "Now that's music." She stalked off, and she returned for many appearances. Yeah, you can see the little kids performing, and there's the two little shorties. You see them working the equipment. This guy over here, he was sort of like a Luther Vandross, sort of a blues singer. This guy here, Dante Fain. Dante was a charismatic young man heading for gang life. A true leader, super talented young man. This program changed his life, and he became a producer in his own right. Remember, this is from 1994. In a year since, he's become a well-known local producer. We did festivals. So we started with People's Housing Music Fest. And what we had is the Drum Festival. That was the first one. And we invited cultural performers from the neighborhood to be one after another. And so there was steel drum performers, taiko drummers, calypso drummers, fire dancers, all kinds of stuff in this one long festival. And at the end of that day, we passed out musical instruments to the audience. All the musicians came back and did a multicultural drumming jam with the audience participating. It was a beautiful representation of multicultural harmony in this community through music. I found these guys, these drummers, you can see with all that gear, they were drumming in Lincoln Park. And I approached them and said, they're called the Primal Connection. And I said, you guys need to come up to Howard Street. And they came without being paid. They showed up with all their gear. They set up their gear out in front of the theater and just started wailing. And they got a huge crowd, as you can imagine. And they were just wailing. And they took a break. And of course, one of our kids sits right in and starts drumming. So the deal was, I asked the audience, who here wants to learn how to drum? And of course, everybody raised their hand. And I had already arranged with Primal Correction to return to the theater the following Saturday as paid artists to teach drumming, which they did. We taught drumming for about 5 or 6 Saturdays. They got a core group of about 4 to 5 kids who were quite skilled. And I got them a gig down at Navy Pier. When Navy Pier opened, I think it was in 1995, these guys have performed and got paid good money for performing on Saturdays. That was a unit with the adult drummers with these kids. So you can start to get to see where my brain is going here about mixing arts and the economy, training, culture, and economic development. The videotape that you saw was about the tile people. That's Kay Hauk, a master ceramicist who happens to live near Howard Street. I seduced her into becoming our ceramicist, and we created something called the Tile People. She was training, as you saw, those young people and adults in the craft of installation. And you can see the tile that they created for people's housing that was in our headquarters. But the image in the center is at Loyola. This guy here with the glasses was the president of Loyola. And this was in the headquarters of the Center for Urban Research and Learning. So that's a paid gig that the tile people got to create that installation. And they also got gigs in private homes and businesses. When People's Housing went out of business in 1995, I gave Kay all the gear, and she just simply took all the stuff to the Northwestern Settlement House on Milwaukee and ran that program for about 7 years. And so some of these kids grew up under her tutelage and are master ceramicists at this point. Gregory Cook, you see the guy in the headphones with the keyboard. Gregory lives about 3 blocks from where we were working. He is a DJ, was a DJ, and he had all this gear. And we got him to produce and record this album. So this was actually a cassette tape that we produced called The Best of Howard Street Volume 1. And all the performers on there were neighborhood people that we discovered in the open mic. So there's Mrs. Jones there, you see, with Oboe William King, he's got the goofy t-shirt on. And she has 2 tracks. And the youngest performers, you can see there in the black and white picture, were performing as well. There's a video that you can watch if you want to called The Best of Howard Street that was made that explained all that. We're quite proud of that album. As I say, People's Housing went out of business, but I had shopped this album to RCA's Black Music Division. And I'm quite confident that if we had lived another 6 months to a year, we would have gotten actually a distribution deal. And we would have actually been in the record business. And we were sketching out the blueprints for actually building a commercial grade studio in that downstairs space that was sort of open. And that would have been a teaching recording studio that would have been in operation for commercial uses, but also for training. And we would have trained young people to do the skills needed to work in a commercial studio and then get them jobs. Again, this is 25 years ago at $20 an hour. With a certificate of completion of skills from our recording studio. So that was on the drawing board, sadly, when we went out of business. That's the drumming ensemble that I showed you, I mentioned to you, and there they are performing in the picture on the lower side of, at one of our community events. We discovered a lot of talent over the short time we were together. And if you ever watched Def Poetry Dram, you may have seen this guy. Malik Youssef, who's now a multi-Grammy winner, but he made his debut on our stage back in the day, and there he is performing in what we called the Saturday show. So this was a Saturday morning variety show that we put on for the families and kids with refreshments provided by local merchants. So parents could bring their young kids, and there'd be comedy and music, appropriate for families. And there's Malik performing. He has 2 tracks on the Best of Howard Street, including a sort of a tone poem ballad called Hollywood Jerome, which he turned into an Emmy Award-winning film a few years later. So that's just some of the joy. I just love this picture from the open mic performances. So the lesson that I will share with you now is this. The open ages, the all ages mic served as a kind of a gateway, if you will, It was very fun to promote, super, super popular. As I say, it was once a month, then they begged us to make it twice a month, and then they begged to make it weekly, and it just grew and grew. And from that event, you can see we grew a writing class. And we published a community newspaper in which the kids wrote columns and were paid for their participation, but they had to participate in our writing class first. As I showed you from the open mic, it led to a talent show on cable television, and then recording the album. So it suggests kind of a flow, a way of thinking about the work. All this, as I say, came to a conclusion in December 1995, when sadly People's Housing went out of business. However, I got recruited by Chicago Park District to take that work to Douglas Park in Lawndale, and was hired as a community organizer for the arts, and spent 2 years there organizing and transforming Douglas Park into what is now known as a community cultural center. It's a conversation for another day, the dozens and dozens of things that we did at Douglas Park, but it sort of had the same spirit of inventiveness and collaboration. We worked with everyone from Ravinia to gospel preachers to WGCI, on and on and on. Local artists taught arts in the Park District, and so much more. But that led to a network of 12 cultural centers across the city, and it's because of my work that those exist. So that is the story. I will now stop sharing the screen, but I'll keep the recording going so that it keeps you guys, the questions that you might have, it'll be for the record, for your colleagues who might want to see this later. Okay, good enough?
Great. Thank you, Tom. Steve, any response?
Sure. A couple of things. Number one, it's clear that a person like you, over the course of their career, for what you stand and for whom you stand, you will make a lot of friends and a lot of enemies. And because considering the campaigns you've been involved in and the simple asks that you've made, that one, let's just consider arts and culture, and we discuss the narrative of Chicago, would be a slam dunk and a no-brainer, unless it's Tom Tresser who's asking. And anytime a white person authentically and truthfully strives to empower Black people, ends up with a target on their back. So I guess the question is, as you've moved forward, because a lot of the highlights of what you've been doing, but was from 20, 25 years ago or more. And so what have you been doing in the meantime? And what does the next phase of troublemaking look like for you?
Well, I'm a tool maker. I believe in infrastructure for progress and creativity. And so the Civic Lab is actualizing this idea of infrastructure for progressive creativity. So we call ourselves a do tank for progress and justice. And we build tools. And, when we had the physical space, it was a wonderful place. So, so there's a through line about space making and place making, which is why I reached out to you guys in the first place. I just saw that picture in the Tribune and it spoke to me. I knew exactly what you were trying to do. And of course, the tour that you guys gave really spoke to my heart. So placemaking and space making is critical. But I'm not sure, we get it. The guys who work in space and place understand the importance of having a physical place to be and do and commune. I'm not sure where the funders are. Maybe they've caught up with us. So building the Civic Lab out and keeping it going, as an idea and eventually as a physical space is very important to me. And I sort of gave up frankly, on the arts. I mean, I spent a lot of time running around the country from, let's say, 93 to 2003, trying to radicalize the creative community about the ascension of the far right. And I did a lot of organizing. I did something called Greater Chicago Citizens for the Arts. We endorsed candidates. I did Arts for Braun. I raised about $20,000 for Carol's first campaign. And it was an attempt to try to make a comment to our creative colleagues, not just here, but elsewhere, that we need to be in the fight. We need to be with our progressive brothers and sisters who are being targeted by the far right, whether they were gay rights people or abortion rights or whatever it was. I mean, these far right people went after the licenses of public radio stations, you know, in the 90s and 2000. And I had something called the Creative America Project. I spent about 4 years of my life trying to essentially train and inspire creative people to run for office. You can believe that. I teach a lot. So one of the ways I put bread on my plate was I taught at many universities, always as an adjunct. You know, and so I still do that a little. You know, what am I up to? I'm spending a lot of time still on this TIF work. We're working with 7 cities right now, with activists and organizers who are trying to fight economic injustice in these boondoggles, including activists in Detroit. And now Olympia, we're working with a group called Save Our Southlands, who are headquartered in Olympia Fields. Connie Means is an old organizer. She's goes all the way back to the founding of Operation Push, Connie does. And she's the leader of this thing called SOS. And they want us to do a TIF illumination for all the 10 villages inside Rich Township. So that's a piece of work. And then there's the next book coming. So, you know, we'll just sort of leave you hanging about what that's going to be about.
Hey, oh, come on. Nice tease. You're good. You are definitely in the arts.
All right, I'll just give you I give you a tease. It's about more public. And my punchline is we need more public.
I know where you're going.
And you know, if it's got the word public on it, we love it. We praise it. We sing its praises at the Civic Lab. And actually, that's how I identify myself these days. I call myself a civic educator and a public defender. And it's very funny that when I do a public speech, public talk, or a meeting or whatever, I introduce myself like, who's this guy, Tom Tresser? Why should you care what he has to say? I put my cards on the table and say, look, I'm about the public. And so I say I'm a public defender. And there's a moment when people go, oh, I know what he means. Yeah. And I think that's a very present and powerful thing. And I hope that maybe if we work together, we can explore that. You know, this idea of public spaces and places is like a political act, really, to stand for public stuff, even though you're obviously a 501c3, a private nonprofit. But it's still this idea of having what you're contemplating over there, you know, down on Pulaski and in the hood is this place of making and doing and sharing that is very public, obviously, even though it's, you know, some guy owns the lease, but the spirit of it is this is for everybody. I mean, that's what I got from David. Is this what we're doing here is for everybody, and it's about time that these guys got some good stuff, high quality. Like he was telling the story about, you know, how people were crying when they were looking at the garden, right? And they what's this doing here? And other comments that he said along those lines. Well, that's the work that we did up at People's Housing. It's you know, people deserve the highest quality public stuff that we have to offer, you know, without exception. I think that's a short-term answer. I hope responsive to you, Steve.
No, absolutely. It's interesting you had mentioned, because everything that you were doing, especially when you founded the Civic Lab, was ahead of its time and similar to what Melissa's been doing for 15 years and what I did for nearly 20 years on Worldview, was that people didn't quite get what we were doing, or except for our devoted fans, our groupies and such, or why we were doing it, or what the relevance was. And And so taking these global outlooks, and global doesn't, I'm not referring to international borders necessarily, but intersectionality and how these issues, they're all interconnected and they're on a continuum, and that just because there's an inflection point in history or in policy, like in media, where we move on or we ignore or we belittle and ignore and then absorb and then say, oh, well, no, of course we knew that all along. I think that now, although it took George Floyd's martyrdom, his execution, in order to, for some reason, that was the moment that woke people. I don't know. That we'll be doing studies and writing books about that forever and a day. But I am definitely not only interested, but completely what's the word I'm trying to say? I guess I am completely engaged in the literal sense of the word, enraptured in what you want to do. And it seems like just on a surface level, there's so many ways we can work together. And then in a more transformational level over time, there's so many more ways that we can work together. So I'm certainly optimistic and hopeful that we will proactively seek those opportunities rather than wait for them. Because clock's ticking, time's up, and there's no time to waste. And you've done this with a sense of urgency, and it's the sense, and it's the urgency that has been lacking that I think is now finally catching on. And we've got to leverage this quote unquote moment, because we are in a desperate race to get back to normal. But for most of us, normal wasn't that great. So there it is. I did also want to ask you just a blunt question. What don't we know about you?
What don't you know?
What don't we know?
A lot. I've been on the record for most of my public life. I mean, you're going to see more on me.
So let me tell you, let me just get brass tacks here. So I'm asking the question the way that my people would ask the question, who'd look at you kind of sideways, like, why is this white boy in my neighborhood trying to do whatever? Like, is he, some kind of, what's up with that?
Well,
right? So what don't we know?
Well, I don't think there's much,
because Melissa's encountered some of that.
I mean, I've been, well, all right. So let me try to unpack that. So People's Housing was in a Black neighborhood, but I got no pushback or gruff or chaff about the work that we did. It was righteous. It spoke for itself. We hired people of color from the community, artists from the community. And I was like the guy. So, I mean, I had people coming to me every day, like a policeman was like a bodybuilder. He comes in, he says, I want to have a gym. So we like, okay, talk to me about how do we make that happen? The next day,
you did it.
Huh?
You just went and did it, right?
Yeah. And then the next day,
that doesn't happen.
Yeah. A woman comes in and says, I want to teach jewelry. And she's got obviously handmade items on her person. Do I know she can teach? So I said, I don't know. Let's give you 4 Saturdays. Here's a budget of $100. What do I got to lose? We'll put our flyer out, but you also have to work the street yourself to bring people to your class. And at the end of the 4 sessions, I'm going to attend and I'll have people give me feedback. I'm going to know whether you're bogus or not. Teenagers want to do a dance. Okay, what's the rules for doing a teen dance? Are you going to allow gang insignia? How will you young people manage the space? They decided that they wanted a off-duty policeman, so I hired a deputy with a wand, and they wanted every person who came into the dance, but the rules were out there that were set up by the young people. I gave them a budget. They bought a bunch of sodas and soft drinks, and they made money on that, and then they decided democratically how to spend that money.
No feasibility study?
No,
No?
no.
You didn't hire a consultant to
No.
know?
No, it's so again, this is again, without knowing it, this is actually a design practice called cheap iteration, fail early and fail fast. But this was back in the early 90s. But now it's understood in what's called the human-centered design practice, as taught by IDEO and Frog Design, and a lot of groups that make boku bucks working with corporate America that have now slided sideways into social justice and nonprofit work. It's called human-centered design. And one of the techniques is called rapid iteration. And you basically don't study it. You just, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Let's make it fast and cheap and test it, but then also learn from it. So that would be a practice I would bring to your operation.
It sounds very familiar. I mean, Steve and I are very much.
Yeah, you do it. You do it. People who are creative and iterative just do that anyway. They may not have a name for it. I sometimes call it making the path by walking it. That's a social justice term that comes from the Highlander Center in Kentucky. But
we call it a philosophy of yes, or building the plane while flying.
Building the plane while flying. Yeah, laying the track, running by the train is the same feeling I think we have as creative people who trust our ability to, like, we're not going to go too far wrong. I mean, if we go wrong, it's not going to be that far wrong, right? And you can make a correction and learn, and then it'll be better the next time. However, I will say from my anti-Olympics work, I have been accused of being anti-Black, but that's by people who are in the pay of the machine. So you may come across somebody who'll say that Chesser guy, he's anti-Black. That's because I was against the Olympics. I am against the Obama Center in Jackson Park. I'm very upfront about that. That critique won't really stand up to
you're anti-bougie Black, then, is what you're telling me.
Well, I'm anti people stealing public shit. I don't care if they're Black or white.
I know.
Yeah, but you know, for some, you know, in the dirty world of Chicago politics, you know, someone might go, yeah, I think I heard of that guy.
I got you. Okay, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I think that's about it, though. But I'll put, you know, we've been invited, Steve, into 170 places, and about 80% of them are Black. So we've been down to Chatham, and we've been into Markham, and I mean, all kinds of places in the city, invited by African-American leaders, Latino leaders, to do our work. And we've been warmly received and much thanked and loved for giving our information about TIFs and whatever, you know, how Chicago is not broke. You know, as I say, the mainstream media has avoided me like the plague, but the Black media has not. I've been on WVON at least 25 times.
Right.
So I go on Cliff Kelly's show or Mark's show or Perry Small or whoever, you know, and it's like I'm speaking a language, or the things I'm speaking of is nothing new to those particular, you know, journalists, right? And the calls that we get are always like, oh, thank you, Mr. Chesser, you know, this, and then they go off and talk about something that, you know, is relevant to the segment. So hopefully that's a little bit of
I'm done.
Closure there.
That's it. I'm done.
But we are at the point of trying to figure out what comes next. I mean, I think we're all very aligned in the work that we're wanting to do and the way that we're wanting to get it done. And we're, I think, at the point, Steve has finished sort of cross-examining Tom. And I think we're at the point of talking about, like, okay, so what do we do? What comes next? So I don't know where we want to start. I mean, I to fill you in really quickly, Trish, basically, are you at all familiar with the People's Housing in Rogers Park? Were you ever familiar a little bit?
teeny little bit, yeah.
So it was like the transformation of a big theater, a big vacant, empty theater into housing, and all. Tom brought into the mix a lot of cultural efforts to build community. And Tom has talked a little bit to me about thoughts about how to create the tiny houses entirely with North Lawndale. Sorry. Sorry, he's trying to protect us. I don't know what from. So the thought of like trying to figure out how these tiny houses are entirely manufactured in North Lawndale by people from North Lawndale, going back to North Lawndale, you know, that's some of his thought process or experience with a project like that. So I bring that up just to say that would be one avenue where he could invest his methods and his creativity to figuring out how the tiny houses become as beneficial to the community as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's an amazing thought. Yeah. I mean, I've been so focused on getting my little one prototype done. And so far it's been worked on in 3 states. But I hadn't really thought about only building at North Lawndale. That would be awesome.
Yeah. So that's one example of like taking what we have going on and what we're trying to do, and letting Tom grow it or expand the vision around it to be more community driven and more beneficial. I also really like his survey. I shared this with Emily a little bit, just basic ideas about standing in front of the people's housing with a survey and asking everybody that went by, you know, what would you really like to learn? Like, if we had a class here, what would you come and take a class about? And starting there. Hold on, just one second.
Yeah, we practice what's called asset-based community development practices, ABCD, as articulated by Kretzmann and McKnight. I worked with Jody decades ago, and he counseled us at People's Housing. And
Sure.
If we work together, I can go into some detail about that. But that was the philosophy underneath the interaction with the neighbors. You go on a treasure hunt, and you become known as a space, and then you'll have people stopping by. There'll be no end of people coming to you with requests to collaborate and, you know, interact, and that is good vibes. And we can, you know, definitely make that happen.
Yeah, and I think, of course, I'm sure Melissa and Steve have let you know, Kevin has been, whether he's stating it or not, practicing that basically for some time already. And it shows when you're in the neighborhood, people feel comfortable coming by and commenting and coming with ideas. And as Melissa has seen, just the fact that we've decided to, as a theater group, to be there has led to all sorts of people, including you, Tom, reaching out.
Yeah, so I will be transparent or candid or honest or whatever, that my the thing that frightens me most is supporting all of these efforts. I feel like we're growing at a rate that I don't know how to fundraise for. And so I see the vision. I feel like the team is forming, and I'm still sort of waiting for the last piece of organizing the funds to meet the capacity.
Well, that is a perfectly reasonable thing to worry about, and I can help you in terms of what I call the infrastructure and sustainability of sort of starting what we call small with small bites of the various creative apples that you might want to have in your basket, but also thinking ahead towards local and national funding, and expanding and scaling things that are excellent and exemplary, which is where we were going at People's Housing. Like, we started with nothing, other than my boss's commitment to my salary, which was, I think, $42,000 back in 1993. She liberated that from her budget and said, you manage the theater. I have no other money for you, but we can pull here and there, if you like cans of paint, things like that you can pull from inventory. But in terms of actually having, I had to raise that, and I raised it up to $250,000. So I was able to make the sale. And I should say that in those days, it was difficult because my background was in the arts, and I would go to arts funders and they say, well, Tom, you work for a housing organization. So we don't have any money for that. And then I would go to the People's Housing's traditional funders, which is a completely different set of characters, and say, what are you doing the arts for? What does People's Housing have to do with the arts? That's old conversation. That is not the case anymore. The NEA has long since recognized this blending, and that they've long since funded work in housing projects. And the Department of Housing and Urban Development have long since created programs that recognize the power of the arts to actually develop communities. And there are lots of other programs, national funders who have gifted money to, similar kinds of programs. So I know in many cities, there are these long-lived exemplary programs who've received national funding, and they've been around for a long time. I'm thinking of the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild in Pittsburgh, for one, is probably the national example. Bill Strickland, who was my role model. I basically wanted to be the Bill Strickland of Chicago, and I was holding myself up to his model. But there are several other examples across the country of which all you have to do is say their name. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I see what you're trying to do. So that wasn't the case back in the day. But still, I was able to leverage almost $250,000 in 12 months.
Yeah, this is the part. This is the fork in the road where Melissa and I help one another. Where she worries about these things, I just never do. I just don't. And actually, when you do, it makes you a slave to capitalism. I think that when you have a vision and you have the passion and you have smart people and you know who you are and you know whom you serve, opportunities just pop up. We're meeting you now. 8-9 months ago, Melissa didn't know she was going to have $250,000 from the NOF. Boom, there it is. So I'm not worried about that, Tom. So we are in another phase. We're in another era, and all individually, professionally, and as organizations. And
yeah, I hear you, brother.
And that doesn't mean you don't do your due diligence and all of that.
Right.
I got you, but
I hear you.
Not worried.
The work will speak for itself, and
That's
I see
right.
it's already at such a level of excellence and wonderfulness that I think the team that you're assembling here and to assemble will speak for itself. And you're going to be fighting people off with sticks. People are going to want what you're offering.
I know. Yeah.
The way that you can, the things that I see envisioning, the things that are happening there, the solidarity in the community that's going to be building in short order. It'll be like a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's going to take off like nuts. Like we had at People's Housing, like I say, we were serving 12,000 people a year, and when we started with nothing. And so it says that there's an appetite in the neighborhood. It's underserved in all these manners. So people are thirsty.
That's the thing.
And they're desirous for these kinds of programming that you're going to offer. And that it's just, and
they've never had people serve them.
Yeah.
The way that, when you approach them, and even the interview we did today on Reset, where Maurice Cox in the Southwest, whatever investment fund, and then the aldermen are always throwing shade at him because he's bypassing them and he's going directly to the people, asking them what they want. And so if you talk to the people, they love what he's doing. You talk to the aldermen and the mayor and the business people like you with the Olympics and the Obama life, it's a different story. And so for the first time, and who knows, however, if ever, in this community, people are coming, we're doing something for them, about them, driven by them. And once they got past the whole it's too good to be true phase, then it was rocket ship, you know. They're all in, and they're our defenders, they're our army, you know, they're our protectors. And so all we have to do is just maintain our authenticity and just keep moving, you know. Like you said, you make the path by walking it, and that's what we're doing. I would then also say that very important to me that we have a takeaway about what is the next step, not necessarily even steps, but the next step. And then let's just begin moving forward.
Well, I would propose that Theodore Y engage me as I don't know what, the artist in residence, activist in residence, collaborator in residence for some period of time, you know, as a trial, you know, for consultation, program building, whatever, you know, planning,
I see,
however you want to think about it, you know.
That's something we can talk, we'll discuss. I would say that have we brought on a grant writer yet? Have we been? Okay. So then I would say the next meeting would be Melissa with in consultation with our grant writer to get together with Tom to begin drawing up strategies in order to take those steps to implement the ideas and the strategy, and then also where we just draw up a path to where people are compensated for what they do, because that is at the heart of the model, that people in the arts and people who are working for the public good have a right to a living wage. They have a right to do good in the world and support themselves and their families. And that is something that I personally will never compromise on. Now, doesn't mean people are always going to get paid what they're worth, but there's always going to be an effort made to make sure that it's sustainable, not only for the organizations, but for the individuals. So we have to take that holistic approach.
And that's where I brought up the finances, because I am currently the only full-time employee at $20,000 a year, Tom. So your job at the People's Housing 25 years ago was twice my salary. And so we've now promised to have an intern under a paid intern under every position inside the theater, but those individuals are not getting paid. So I'm promising a lot of money to a lot of people that I don't yet have. There's a very big cart before the horse situation going on here. You're muted, Steve. So I know there's money to be had for this, and we just don't have it right now to even hire the person who would help us spend it better.
I'd be happy to talk to your, you know, grant writer and yourself, Melissa, gratis, in terms of just thinking about who to approach, you know, and what kind of narrative would you put together, you know, to pitch a funder, you know, at a meeting. You know, what's your lead cards, you know, what would be in the pitch document, that kind of thing, or if it was a presentation or whatever the situation would be. And that I'd be happy to do is just as my gift to you.
Okay.
Selfishly, that hopefully would end up, you know, I'd be able to work with you, you know, on some ongoing basis. But I hear you, Steve, and I respect that a lot. And that's our philosophy at the Civic Lab. We don't ask people to volunteer for us either. So we don't do that. You know, if you do work for us, you're paid. So
and just being transparent in that, you know, we're launching and building, and that the payoff, so to speak, is not going to be immediate, but it was always the primary goal. So
sure.
Okay, yeah, Trish.
I'm curious, Tom, how do you see yourself devoting your time? I imagine, I mean, you have Civic Lab, you have other responsibilities, so I don't imagine you're looking for a full-time position with
No.
Theater Y.
No, I'd say
But,
we'd work out some hourly, you know, some kind of retainer for a certain number of hours per month. And I think part of that is on the site as it opens up, you know, that part of the deal is I'm sort of a rainmaker, you know, and so part of our time is brainstorming. I've already got a long list of potential collaborators, many of whom I already have a personal relationship with. So if we were to work together, we'd sort of go through we'd sort of unpack. I would probably spend our first hours of engagement together with doing some sort of retreat, or I would call it an advance. And it's part of how I work with other clients and other stakeholders to remind ourselves of who we know and what assets we have. And that's where I could share some of these ideas of potential collaborators. And we could sort of, like, I can imagine us being in a physical room together. Oh my God, actually physically being in the same space, with some flip charts, and start to sketch out, like, 2 years of potential work and collaborators. And you guys are like sorting them. Oh, that makes sense. Let's put him at the top of the list. Or, it depends on also what David is up to. If he buys that corner building, where he's at, that's kind of part of that story, like the campus, as it were. How's that rolling out? So we kind of have that wide view picture of your plans and David's capacity. And then we can overlay that, like, oh my God, that would be great. Why don't we call these guys and get them involved, and that sort of thinking. And I think as a result of that, maybe half day's work, you could imagine a work plan for me. You could say, okay, we see how we want to deploy Tresser. We'd like you to do this on site for whatever, but we'd like you to go maybe arrange some meetings over here or whatever. You know what I mean? We get to know each other a little better, and I get to know your board and your staff. I mean, I already have a sense of some of your power, but there's probably a lot I don't know either. Part of what I'm really good at is making 1 and 1 and make 5 out of it. So I see something from Steve's background, and I see something from Trish's background, and it triggers an idea for a collaborative or some educational effort or some other artistic effort, and that gets added to the mix. That might trigger thoughts, and that's kind of my strength, actually. If you look at what happened at the Civic Lab over those 2 years, it's a wide, crazy range of activities, but all centered around the civics and creativity. They had a logic, if you will. So anyway, that's kind of my first thought about it.
And just from my own knowledge, because I would really love to have the Civic Lab on our campus. I've been aware of your work through Brandon Smith and super impressed. And I just think it's great to have that in the mix of what's happening in the ecosystem of what's going on our campus. But we're also relatively short on space. And so I'm curious how much space you would need to work out of there, because there's also like the Young Men's Educational Network, which my brother-in-law runs up the street, has a lot of space. And so we are potentially expanding some of our efforts into that building as well, because it's just, they have more space than they need. And we are cramming a lot of institutions into a small area. So if you know vaguely what amount of space you would be looking to run out of.
Well, it depends. Again, this is the idea of brainstorming. You don't have a lot of space to have actually a co-working place. So if you had more space than less, I'd say, well, let's do a co-working space around creative groups. So I happen to know, some groups that are in that creative space, they need space. Or you might say, no, that's not our vibe. What about groups that deal with food? Maybe that's more, because you have a vacant lot and you're starting to grow food on the. So okay, all right, let's pivot and talk about farming groups or groups that are doing food justice. Maybe that's the sweet spot. But if you don't have that space, then it's a classroom. So what we would do is programming civic events out of some community space. It could be the theater space, just any place that's available where people can come and congregate, and there'd be some place to project, and we did 80, I've done a total of 140 actual workshops from 2013 to the present, but all again, it's about civics. So like, how to code, how to read a map, how to run for office. And this is where, again, the kind of our creative mushing together comes. You're already teaching classes around your specialty of theater and your special way, but maybe with Steve, it's like how to do a podcast. So we touch on and Trish is like how to make a drawing, so you take people's native skills of sketching and graffiti work, and you may find that there's a young person around who we want to send to architecture school. I mean, there could very well be someone who walks by your space every day who could get a free ride at UIC if we had that relationship. So we have an open enrollment sketching class that's curated by Trish or her colleagues, and out of that we keep our eyes open and we find talent and we send them to UIC, and they get a free ride. I mean, that is completely possible. But again, it just depends on what you're up for and what floats your boat.
I would also say to sort of flip the thinking in that rather than thinking about we have this much in the bank, therefore we can only do this. It's we want to do this. How do we get there? So if let's say because it was going to just be a theater, and now it's going to, and then you add a cafe, and then you add a bookstore, and then you add a potential restaurant, and now it could be a media center. And so then you begin to think about, well, how much land do we have? Well, we can't expand outward, but we can upward, or that there's adjacent properties. And so now you're thinking about the adjacent property differently if you're incorporating something else into your vision. And then that changes the scope of what funding you're going after and the funders that you're going after. And then all of a sudden, you're no longer going for the $250,000 small business grant with NOF. You're going after the $500,000 grant. So it's in terms of I'm less concerned about the space and more concerned about the vision. So if the vision is larger, then as Tom says, you start small. Heck, it could be a closet. Who cares, right? It's just, you just start.
Yeah.
The larger question is, do we want to incorporate this into the vision? And that's a discussion that that we'll have on our own, and we can collaborate on that at another time. But I guess what I'm saying is that I'm appreciative that you are helping us to expand our thinking and our vision, and to help us to consider things, because a co-working space for creatives would be extraordinary in this city.
Yeah.
Let's say even if it's not on the campus, but that we're the driving force behind making it come to fruition wherever.
Yeah. I mean, you can
that's
imagine.
Fine, but
you can imagine a space that has a print studio, a dark room, green screen studio, and other things, and people that you guys know would be teaching those skills on an ongoing basis, and you could start to create your own cultural factory. I mean, people, because where we were heading with the recording program, Steve, was that we were going to have a cycle of work. So there was a lot of Latino people. So the next record was going to be in Spanish, but there's also a lot of storytellers, and we were going to have a whole project where young people were going to interrogate their elders and draw from them their stories of origin, and that was going to be an album. So we just had this thought of our own imprint. People's Housing imprint of records, or this is before the internet, so
right.
So you can imagine podcasts or other cultural products coming out of the community as you discover the artists and the creatives who are already living there, as well as the people who maybe not think of themselves as artists, but have all that in them. So it could go that way. It's kind of like it's like I threw a lot of spaghetti on the wall at People's Housing. Sure. And not all of it stuck, but enough of it stuck to make a difference.
And even if whenever opportunities like this come along and we decide that this is not something that's within our capacity or within our mission, you still always have to have drivers of these ideas. And so where even if it's not a physical space, but let's say if we can be drivers of the vision, it can encourage someone in Austin. It can encourage someone on the South Side, and we can still be supporters and drivers of the concept. So,
Right. Well,
And-
we're aware of other spaces, and we have relationships with other incubators and other kinds of spaces and maker spaces, and we would bring that into this conversation as part of our kind of unpacking. We would want to map those places and spaces so you guys are aware of who's doing what close to you, because there are allies who for program exchange, and maybe also offering remote like satellite spaces, for some of these other programs. They would pay you to take up a corner, like when you have a show, and there's the lobby space, someone may actually pay you to occupy a table, to recruit for their program because they're nearby or wherever they're doing something that's relevant to your people.
One of the three that fit in the lobby.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I
One
know.
of the three.
I was thinking that it would be great to have the Civic Lab just like running. I don't mean this necessarily because the lobby is very small, and obviously, Steve, we're going to talk about all of this later, but in my head, it was like, man, it'd be great if the Civic Lab was just operating in the lobby, and anybody that came in to get a coffee was overhearing this work and like,
Yeah.
what in the world are they working
I
on?
love that. Yeah, that's again one of our human-centered design principles called planned serendipity. So we very much believe in that. The occasional knocking together of people by chance is actually a very important and powerful thing, and it's something we actually believe in, which is why we love the vibe of walking in off the street. That's so important for anything that I'm engaged in. This is not in the loop. It's not up on the 18th floor. This is on the street. You've got street level presence. It's obviously that something's going on here. There's lights on, there's sidewalk signs, there's buzz, people coming and going. What the hell is going on here? I'm going to pump my head in. That's about as community as it gets. And America has gotten so far away from that. We're so pleased with ourselves. Like Steve is making fun of the consultants and all that trappings and stuff. It's so true. And that's why this is not that. And it's so cool. That's why I love it to pieces. And so you'll get that. You'll have that. I mean, I put a sign up on people's housings. Before anything happened, there was a big sign on the front door that says, "Ask Tom about this space." And there was like a sign pointing that way. And so people would like follow the signs to my office around the corner, and I would hear, "Where's this Tom guy?" Just by just yelling out. And then I would go out and meet whoever, and suck him into my world.
okay. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful. I appreciate it.
Unless you have any wrap-up questions for us, then Melissa will certainly be in touch. And
All right.
very
Fair
excited
enough.
about continuing this
All right. Well, then
conversation.
I'll end the recording here. So we're now off.